In 1100 CE, there was a city on American soil larger than London. It had roads, a skyline, and an observatory that tracked the heavens with engineering precision. And within 200 years, every single person who lived there was gone. 12 miles east of what is now St. Louis, buried beneath strip malls and state highways, sits the largest pre-Columbian urban settlement north of Mexico. At its peak, Cahokia housed somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people. That is not a village. That is not a camp. That is a city by any definition archaeologists use, except when they write about this one. The centerpiece is Monk's Mound, a stepped earthen pyramid so massive it contains more total volume than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was built in stages over generations, a deliberate architectural statement visible for miles across the Mississippi floodplain. Around it, a grid of plazas, residential districts, and specialized craft quarters spread outward in a layout that required centralized planning. Cahokia was not a settlement that happened. It was designed. What they have been slower to publicize is what stood to the west of the central plaza, a circle of massive red cedar posts precisely placed that archaeologists eventually named Woodhenge. When the sun rises on the winter solstice, it aligns exactly with one of those posts in the peak of Monk's Mound. On the summer solstice, it does the same from a different post. This is not coincidence. This is not approximation. The margin of error in these alignments has been documented and measured, and it is essentially zero. The people of Cahokia were watching the sky with an accuracy that rivaled any observatory on Earth at that time. That fact appears in academic literature. What appears far less often is what it implies about the sophistication of the social and intellectual structure required to build it. By 1350 CE, Cahokia was empty. The mound stood. The post holes remained. The city itself ceased to exist as a functioning human settlement. What followed was 30 years of academic paper writing that converged almost uniformly on one explanation: climate change, a prolonged drought, environmental stress, convenient, vague, and difficult to falsify. But the physical record tells a more complicated story. Evidence of internal social stratification, elite resource control, and what several researchers have privately described as the deliberate dismantling of central authority from within the population has existed in the ground since excavations began in earnest in the 1960s. That evidence was documented. It was not ignored. It was filed, categorized, and then consistently underweighted in the conclusions that made it into print. Monk's Mound is the largest pre-Columbian earthwork in North America. It covers 14 acres at its base, rises 100 feet, and was built entirely by human hands without metal tools, without the wheel, without draft animals. At its peak stood a ceremonial building the size of a modern warehouse. The labor required to construct this single structure dwarfs the effort put into most medieval European cathedrals. And yet when you visit the site today, when you stand at the base and look up, the interpretive signs offer you a gentle story about a thriving culture that simply faded. No urgency, no questions, just a managed narrative designed to leave you satisfied and incurious. That management is not accidental. The astronomical precision of Woodhenge cannot be overstated. Archaeologists reconstructed the original post positions from soil stains left in the earth and confirmed that the red cedar poles, some of them 2 feet in diameter, were arranged in massive arcs tracking the solstices, the equinoxes, and specific horizon alignments with documented accuracy. Warren Whittrey, who first identified the structure in the 1960s, understood what he had found. Other researchers expanded on his work for decades. What they produced was evidence of an institutionalized astronomical priesthood, a class of specialists with the political power to organize city-scale labor around celestial observation. That kind of institutional complexity does not dissolve quietly because the weather changed. It gets dismantled. And when something gets dismantled on purpose, someone made that decision. Here is what the climate explanation papers consistently omit. The abandonment of Cahokia was not a gradual erosion. It was a sequence. The outlying agricultural settlements emptied first, beginning around 1200 CE. Then the population contracted toward the monumental core. Then the core itself was abandoned, and the evidence suggests it was abandoned with deliberate thoroughness. Structures were not simply left. Sacred spaces showed signs of ritual closure. Certain artifacts were removed rather than discarded. This matches a pattern anthropologists recognize in other cultures as a managed withdrawal, a civilization walking away from something it built rather than being driven out of it. The researchers who documented these specifics published carefully. They framed their conclusions as possibilities. Because publishing them as conclusions invites a question nobody in their funding environment wants to answer. Who gave the order and why? The most suppressed theory in Cahokian scholarship centers on what excavations beneath Mound 72 revealed. Beneath one of the smaller ceremonial mounds, archaeologists found mass burial pits containing the remains of over 200 individuals, many of them young women arranged in precise patterns, accompanied by tens of thousands of shell beads. The interpretation offered publicly is ritual sacrifice tied to elite burial ceremonies. That interpretation is almost certainly incomplete. What the spatial organization of those burials actually suggests, and what several researchers noted in conference presentations that never made it into mainstream publication, is a system of coercive religious authority so total that its eventual rejection by the population would not look like abandonment. It would look like liberation. A city of 20,000 people does not forget how to farm. It does not forget how to build. When it walks away from a place, it is walking away from something the place represents. By 1350 CE, Cahokia was empty. The mounds remained. The posts of Woodhenge were gone. The surrounding region, which had supported one of the densest pre-Columbian populations in North America, was effectively cleared. When European explorers arrived centuries later, local indigenous nations knew the mounds were ancient. They did not claim them. The oral traditions that survived described the builders as a separate and cautionary people. That cultural memory, the deliberate disavowal of an entire urban civilization by the cultures that came after it, is the detail that never makes the museum placards. Because if you take it seriously, if you sit with what it means for a people to erase themselves from a place that thoroughly, you stop asking why Cahokia was abandoned. You start asking what they were escaping. Cahokia did not fade, it was dismantled. The archaeological record shows something far more deliberate than drought or crop failure. The ceremonial precincts were systematically decommissioned, the elite structures stripped before abandonment, and the population dispersed in an organized pattern inconsistent with crisis flight. Researchers who published findings pointing toward coordinated internal dissolution in the late 1980s and 1990s found their work quietly sidelined in favor of climate-based narratives that required no uncomfortable questions about power, resistance, or whether the people of Cahokia chose to reject what their city had become. They preferred a story where nature was the villain. The alternative, that 20,000 people looked at a theocratic hierarchy built on mass sacrifice and tribute extraction and collectively walked away from it. That story has implications they were never willing to print. The Woodhenge alignment makes it worse for them. A civilization precise enough to engineer a solar calendar from cedar posts, sophisticated enough to coordinate labor across a metropolitan area larger than contemporary London, does not stumble into oblivion over a few bad harvests. Monk's Mound alone required the movement of more earth than some Egyptian monuments. This was not a primitive settlement, it was a capital. And capitals do not empty without cause, without coordination, without someone deciding the system was no longer worth sustaining. The suppression of the internal collapse theory was not accidental. Acknowledging that a pre-Columbian Native American civilization deliberately deconstructed its own political order challenges foundational assumptions about who these people were, what they understood, and what they refused to accept. What was buried here was agency. The academic establishment handed you climate change and walked away, because the real answer, organized, conscious, collective rejection of a corrupt central authority, is too legible, too resonant, and too dangerous to put in a textbook. Cahokia's people did not disappear. They made a choice, and the people who were supposed to tell you that chose silence instead. What is your theory on why Cahokia was abandoned? Climate, collapse from within, or something else entirely? Drop it in the comments, and if you want the history they hoped would stay buried, subscribe, because every week we dig up another story they hoped you'd never find.